Hello, dreamers and thinkers, and welcome back to another episode of Undone. But before we get into that, if you would like to partner with us, send some love, head on over to buymeacoffee.com/undone the podcast. Today we'll be having a heavy conversation, but if you've ever attended one of my events or listened to my podcast, you know that we also sprinkle in a little bit of humor, keep it lighthearted and hopeful. I'm so excited for today's conversation because of the panelists that are joining me, but also because of the conversation that we're having. Just a brief background. Last year we had 3 mental health forums. The first one we had was on lived experiences, and we had an amazing panel of people come and share their experiences of having walked through and still walking through their own mental health battles. And it was really beautiful to see people that look like us just being open and transparent and sharing their stories. The second mental health forum we had was with practitioners who work with the African community around mental health, AOD, that kind of stuff, and just being able to hear why they're passionate about the work that they do and the things that they're seeing and how we can work together as a community to heal. And then the third forum that we had was with people from, what do we call them? Mainstream organizations, I think is the wording that we use. And it was really encouraging to hear them acknowledge the gaps that are in mainstream health services and how they're moving forward to work with community organizations to be able to bridge those gaps and actually meet the needs of our community. And today's mental health forum is going to be on the family unit and us as a community. I think this is a really important conversation. One, because of the work Afri-Auscare do in this space. They work with the mums, they work with the youth, they've got mentoring programs. All of these things kind of work as wraparound services around the family unit. And I guess from the outside in, if you don't know, you'd be wondering, oh, they're probably just doing a bunch of random things. But they're not. These are targeted and specific programs for a reason. And I'm hoping that by the end of today's conversation, we'll come away having a better understanding. We'll come away being able to have conversations in our own friendships, communities, families, around some of these really difficult and complex topics. Hello. Thank you guys for joining us. How are you guys feeling?
Great.
Yes, I'm good. My first one.
This is your first one. I'm excited. We're going to take it light. Smugler, so you're going to go first. So our first question is, from your work in trauma counseling, what's often misunderstood about how trauma shows up in African households?
It's a very juicy question, by the way. And where do I even begin? And I think I want to make sure that I'm giving a kind of a really nuanced answer to that. And I'm a storyteller, so I'll be telling a few stories as well as I answer, the questions that you're putting forward. And one of the things that I think of when I think of that question is about even my training, right? I trained as a social worker, and it's nearly been 20 years ago, and nothing in the curriculum even centered culture other than, your white Australian, client that might come through. And I think it really kind of cemented or conditioned then the way I viewed, trauma in African clients. And because it didn't fit how it was expressed and how it was interpreted, didn't fit what I had learned in your textbooks, right? On how you see, presentations of trauma responses. And it got me thinking, because I read something in the book that said that as part of us Africans surviving, what we have done is, as part of surviving, our traumatic histories and colonialism and a whole lot of things, we then took some of the trauma responses and integrated it into our culture. You know, for example, how many of us have heard from our parents while we're crying and we're in pain sometimes when parents are like, why are you crying? Or I'll give you something to cry about, right? How many people have heard that? And that's a trauma response, right? Then, you know, and then you have people showing up into counseling and saying, I just don't feel like my parents get my pain, right? They don't get my pain. And the way I was taught to be a therapist is to see the individual right in front of you, right? And then to tend to their pain. But you're missing a whole piece because collectively we've experienced trauma that's just now passed on from generation to generation. So if I'm only tending to the person in front of me and saying, how dare your parents tell you that they'll give you something to cry about, and not even centering or considering the trauma that the parents have experienced, what I'm actually essentially doing in my bid to support that person is I'm actually fracturing relationships. Because she's going to go back home, or he's going to go back home and say, my therapist said, you're not tending to my pain and you don't know how it feels like. So she gets me and you don't get me. And you're building a rift between then, you know, generations or, children and their parents. And it also changes the dynamics within the households, right? And then you've got people not feeling like they understand each other. And it's not a holistic way of holding, you know, us as a collectivist, you know, group, but it's also, it's not decolonial. I'm in a process of 17 years of training. I'm unlearning a whole lot of things where sometimes in practice I will leave and I'm like, that was not centering culture at all, but that's how I was trained, right? So that's just the way I think we've seen it really expressed, and I think also the other part to answer that question is that even the way we assess people is very different. Like I had a conversation with someone yesterday of someone who's from an African background who's experienced absolutely atrocious the harm. I can't even speak of the harm and the layers to it. And this person says to me, I'm coming for a consult and I think she's fine because she says she's fine. And I'm like, how do you know she's fine? And she goes, oh, she told me she's fine. You know, the resilience that we hold as Africans, that gets missed until we're at the tip and at the brink and our bucket is so full. And that's when we get to get resources injected. And it's already too late at that point, right? And I said, okay, when you figured out that she's fine, why didn't you dig deeper? Did you ask how her sleep is going? No, I didn't ask. Did you ask if she's sleeping? No, I didn't ask. She is so resilient. And I'm like, boom, that's the problem, right? It's making me almost kind of dislike the word resilient for us. We are resilient, by the way. But I think the problem is sometimes it's used to almost turn a blind eye to our pain, right? I could go on and on and on. I love a good yarn.
No, I love that. I think that was a great answer to the question in that all of our trauma is almost misunderstood when it comes to service delivery, when it comes to being cared for, because we are so resilient, because we do have the capacity to create and hold so much joy that from the outside it's kind of like, oh, they're doing fine, like what is wrong? And we don't often dig deeper. But something that you mentioned that I think connects really well to the question I was going to ask Fraser was around, I guess, there is an emergence in the younger generation who are seeking out therapy, who are seeking out all these different things, and they're trying to help themselves. And then it becomes this thing of, you don't understand my pain, or you don't understand what I'm going through. And Fraser and I worked together for a little bit, and we definitely did hear the kids say this quite a bit. So I guess my question for you is around, what are some of the barriers that you think families face in understanding or navigating the education system in the context of all of that?
Yeah. So with barriers, I guess there's a lot of things we have to take into consideration, like the families, the context that we're dealing with, the African community in general. Our families generally have come here in the last 20 to 30 years. So they're a new community to this society. And such means they're not going to have all the knowledge of everything within this the system, what their rights are, what their responsibilities are, and what that means. So a lot of the time the barriers lie within that, how they engage with the school. I've seen numerous times exactly what Kudza is saying. There's a disconnect when it comes to trust, where the parents don't trust the school, the kids don't trust the school. So immediately with the kids already, there's an aligning on the lack of trust side of things, where communication doesn't work on both sides. And when that happens, now we're in a space where family and students also do have it. They do manipulate that too at times, where they will, to their advantage, they'll use their parents' lack of understanding and say, oh, like, I know my parents doesn't get this information, so I'm going to manipulate it before it gets home, which we're all young, so we do understand that is a reality out there as well. But the other side of that too is with the parents. When parents don't have that trust in the system, what we see is they miss a lot of the early signs and the issues that come up, where we see lack of attendance, or where we see behavioral issues, academic progress, all that kind of stuff. When there's no proactive engagement due to trust, generally speaking, that does cause issues. And we see the larger issues at the end, but we could have stopped it way earlier if we had access to the early signs. The other side of that, though, which is another thing I've seen, where there's a polarization. We're seeing there's two ends to the spectrum. We have the lack of trust, and we also see parents that over-trust the system too. We see parents that they'll trust the system or the school system over their kid's word. So the kid will come home and say, this happened. But the parent will say, the school said this happened, so you're wrong. And we see, again, what that leads to sometimes, where kids will have that feeling of unheard. They're not being heard, they're not being supported, and they isolate from their parents. There's a break in that relationship. There's a break in the relationship at school. The kids, they go and sort other relationships. Yeah, these are some of the barriers that I've seen. I guess also another thing is parents, like my parents, they always tell me they used to walk 5 kilometers to get to school one way, and then the 5-kilometer walk back. So there was a lot of, and even my uncle, he moved 100 kilometers away to be able to access middle school and higher. For him, that was a very common thing back home, where parents, and they had to, for them to be able to go to school was a privilege, but also for them to go to school, they had to take ownership of that. So for us in this system, our parents actually have to be there to support us, where I feel like the way the system is away from back home, there's a lot of hands-off approach where they trust, they're expecting the kids to go to school. They expect the kids to see that it's a privilege, that it's going to help the outcome, but the kids don't see that, obviously. So it's that understanding, trying to bridge that gap there too. But yeah, those are some of the barriers.
Just to provide a bit of context around why I had asked that question is because one of the first I don't even know if it's the first telltale sign, but you know that a kid is kind of like in the red zone once their disengagement with school has dropped / is non-existent. And then that's when we start to see their engagement in other activities and in other spaces. And so I think that's a really important question to ask and to discuss in the context of the family unit, because yeah, school is a really key and central important part of all of this. And if the parents are having a difficult time navigating that and having a difficult time collaborating with the kids, or even knowing that they need to collaborate with their kids on education, that severely affects what the outcomes can be. Next question. In your work within family services, have you noticed an increase in African families engaging with the system, and what do you think is contributing to that rise?
Ooh, great question. Short answer, yes. And I think there are numerous things that are contributing to that. And I would say that I'll start off with the ones that are most prevalent in terms of the spaces and the conversations that I've had with the department or with case managers that hold, the African families. and have to call it. A lot of it has to do with, the systemic discrimination, implicit bias, and also a lack of cultural responsive and competent workers as well. And I think the matrix and the assessment and the lens in which our communities are measured on is also contributing massively to seeing African children in the child protection system. And also just a lack of an understanding of the parenting styles that we do have, and that we get parented very differently, in as much as I used to absolutely be calling my parents strict and how dare you, how come I don't get the freedom other children have. I think as an adult, I can see how protective some of those things were. And I can see how they got me out of a lot of trouble as well. But I think what we're seeing happening as well is this extremeness and around children's voices. And having things are done very differently now. The first conversation sometimes starts with a child, which I absolutely get, and I think every child has a right to, to feel safe, and to feel seen and to have their needs met, and I think that's really key. But I think there's some things where I've noticed that a child has had this conversation with child protection, and they've said, I don't want to leave at home, right? And that's been taken with so much weight, and the decision has been made that the child doesn't want to live at home. And I've got in spaces, and I'm like, but what are the protective concerns? And there's a lot of stuttering and stammering and saying the child doesn't want. I'm like, but this is a child who can't even drive a car. How come they get to decide where they live? Unless you're saying to me there's genuine concerns around their safety, I don't think they get to get a say, because not always are the systems, the way they're set up, protective of young people. I've actually seen some young people, the trajectory or the way their life goes is worse when they're in the system, disengaging from school, getting with the wrong crowds, dabbling in crime as well. So, and having, conversations where someone is gone, but mom is so strict, can't allow the child to come home at 3 a.m., therefore it's restrictive. I'm like, based on who? Who wants a 14-year-old to be out installing cars at 2 a.m.? No one wants that. So I think the measure of that is really hard, but also the understanding of us and the things that we have to struggle with, being, immigrants and refugee backgrounds, and the stuff that I think it speaks to the training and the assessment of going in there and going, but the way the pantry wasn't full, it wasn't stacked with food overflowing. And I'm like, but you're speaking to a parent who's working 16 hours a day to provide for the family. Just because there wasn't food in the cupboard like overflowing doesn't mean that the kids are not fed. It just means that's the reality of their life, where they're living paycheck to paycheck. That's just the reality of it. So if that's a measure of whether a parent is being neglectful, that's unfair. And we also come from a village, right? How many of us were raised by uncles and aunts and a cousin and stuff where parents were not there and were being looked after? But when child protection goes in there and sees a 16-year-old, 17-year-old cousin looking after a 5-year-old, it's neglect, because the parent is at work and making sure that, the family is fed. So those are some of the reasons, as well, of going, that the family unit is not doing really well, so we're going to get in, and then the child then comes into the system, and it's harder to get the kids back home once they're in the system, because that's when the racism, the implicit bias is on steroids in the case planning and the way decisions, are actually made. And the other thing is as well is around, the parenting in terms of discipline, right? Where I think most of us would have had sometimes a bit of a hiding, sometimes of going, you've been naughty, and that is then, that the measure then becomes your parents are physically, very abusive. So therefore, we need to take you away from your parents. So I feel like those are some of the things, I've talked about the, the struggles in terms of, socioeconomic stuff. I've talked about, the system itself needing to change. But the system was never built for us. It was built for a certain cohort. And now we're trying to catch up and we're trying to sprinkle a little bit of cultural awareness. Yeah.
That was a well-encompassing answer. I think it highlighted, the different layers and complexity of the whole situation, and kind of leads in perfectly to my next question that you can both answer this one, which is, I guess, we kind of spoke about how kids disengage, I guess, in the family unit, in school, in their community, whatever that ends up looking like, and then can end up engaging in the wrong activities and the wrong crowd. What are the early signs that you see in both of your spaces, and what roles do you think families play in either disrupting or unknowingly influencing that path?
From a school-based lens, in terms of what are the early signs, I would say drop-off in your school attendance, changes in the attitudes towards school. You got what are their idols, their role models, who they look up to, their behavior, academic progress as well. Those are the sort of early signs, I would say. In terms of, I guess, the role family can play in that situation, though, is the family engaging with the school in terms of, are they going to the parent-teacher interviews? Are they reading the reports that the school is sending them? Are they up to date with the Compass notifications? Are they responding to phone calls? These kind of things help parents stay up to date with relevant information for the child, which can prevent the larger disengagement. If we're catching the early signs, when we're seeing the kids miss a day of school, or they're coming to school late on this day because certain things are happening, then we're catching them early, so we can actually support them way easier here. When we wait until they don't come to school at all, or they're only coming one day a week, we've got a bigger problem now. We've got I shouldn't say problem, but we've got a behavior pattern now that we have to fix, which we can't just do with the snap of a finger. It takes a larger process. So in order to prevent that, I would say a role families play is not engaging with the communications from school, and also reinforcing a bad child identity that sometimes kids have. It's something that I've come across with kids at school, where they believe that they're a bad kid, and the school sometimes, or not even just the school, but families as well reinforce it, their friends reinforce it, and then they start to reinforce it because their behaviors start to mimic that identity, and then their treatment because of those behaviors it just becomes a thing that now it gets hard for them to get rid of that identity. And again, it becomes a process that they have to go through a whole identity upheave, and they just say, I have to change who I am. But in reality, they're not a bad kid. They're just a child that's making mistakes and making bad decisions. And there's a process that they need to go through, and they can keep the essence of who they are. But yeah, those would be some of the things that I've noticed in my experience. Yeah.
Hold on, I'm trying to think of how to. One of the things that you mentioned was the families engaging with the schools, Compass notifications, all that kind of stuff. I don't know about you guys, but who, since they were able to use a computer, has had to help their parents navigate some sort of online technology science site? Yeah, okay, we've all been there. At some point, your parents decide, I'm done learning everything new, and it's over to you. You can carry the next generation. So I guess what is a practical way that parents can do those things whilst also understanding that either maybe one, they don't have the time, or two, they don't actually have the skill set to be able to do some of these things. Or sometimes it's a language thing, okay, I can go to the meeting, but by the time you add the Australian accent, how quickly they're speaking the English and the words that they're using, I missed everything that principal or teacher said to me.
So that's a very good question, actually. In terms of how you would approach that, it's hard to just say one answer to that. It's a very case-by-case response. But I think the first thing is have a relationship with that parent, or the school having a relationship with the parent, but also the parent being open to that too. So it has to be a two-way relationship where the parent is aware that I need to reach out, and okay, the school now knows compass doesn't work for me. So then now they look to making phone calls instead. Or if language is another thing, they can look at getting translators, which schools have the resources and accessibility to do all of these things. So it's about, the school has to obviously know, and I guess that's where the onus on the school goes to. And again, with schools, it depends on who are the advocates. Like me, like and that's my job. So I'm there at the school, I can speak to the school, I can even speak to the parents, but not every school has that. So the parent and the community around the parent as well has to be a way to promote that relationship building between the two. And a lot of the time the onset, unfortunately, if they're in a situation where there's not an advocate at the school, the onset has to come from the parent. Yeah, that would be part to that.
That's what it is.
I guess from my perspective and what I cover, like my heart is that I really never want to see African families engage with the system. I think that's where I am. So, but the reality of it is that there's an increase. I am constantly seeing an increase of African children within the system now more than ever. So I think, as I mentioned, a few things have contributed to that. But having said that, so how do we, I think for me, my heart would be like, how do we stop African families coming into the system? And if they do get into the system, how do we ensure that there are resources and the right people around them to ensure that young people are actually going back, they're actually going back home, right? And I think it starts with a recognition that there's not enough resources to do any preventative work right now, right? There's not enough resources, culturally responsive, decolonial mental health ways where we're not asking people to go and sit in a white room and speak to someone who doesn't look like them about their mental health and trauma, right? We are going into communities and having the right people around the table, and we're having our community leaders, we're having people with lived experiences, and we're having deep listening sessions, we're having co-designing, collaborating on what is the right thing, given that we know intimately what the issues are in our communities, right? We should be the people that are influencing, policy making, processes and procedures, and how things are managed. So for me, I'll be saying we need to bring along, because we know how we want things to be resolved. It's just that I don't think we're given opportunities and a voice, and we're not always in the right spaces to be influencing that. Do I think the tides are changing? Oh, absolutely. Do I think there's still a lot of work to be done? Absolutely. And there's a lot of advocacy to be done. Honestly, sometimes I joke and say I would rather dismantle the whole system and start afresh. It's not realistic, but all I can say is that we all have a part to play in influencing that change so that we do get the right services from our people as well. Because there's a massive distrust, as you were saying about distrust, there's a massive distrust of the system as it is, which is why sometimes people fall off. We miss so many people because that one, notification of at school where, I think a majority of your school age young people, the notifications come from school, and that starts the process then of them getting into the system. So school play an important part as well in this conversation of doing the disrupting and the preventative work of getting young people into the system. Yeah.
As you were speaking, you mentioned the idea of culturally responsive services and practice. So you work with an organization where you are shaping national multicultural practice. Can I say that one more time? National multicultural practice. What? Come on. How do you ensure services move beyond cultural awareness to cultural responsiveness? And if you could kind of give us a quick cliff notes on what the difference between cultural awareness and cultural responsive practices.
Yeah. Oh, I really love that question. I think I'll start off with, when many years after I trained, we got into the bars, right? Cultural awareness, I'm culturally aware. And everyone was clapping hands for themselves, tapping themselves on the shoulders. We're doing a great job. We had to start from somewhere, right? Cultural awareness is, I see it simply as, recognition and an understanding of cultural differences, full stop. But if you're recognizing the difference and understanding the cultural difference and you're not doing anything to translate that into how you adapt, how you modify the services you're providing, it means nothing. It's redundant, really. It's a whole thing around people go to training. I've done my cultural awareness training. I actually know that you're from Africa. I'm like, Africa is a continent. Yeah. And I know this, so I know African people and our stories being told on our behalf and the stereotypes come through. Because I don't think, anyway, a lot of the cultural awareness trainings that I've seen, I don't think they delve quite deeper into how that then translates into how programs are set up, how services are delivered, how practice, how we examine and we critically examine our practice, right? Which goes back to what I was saying, that I've had to reshape and rechange the way I practice. When I was practicing and I was doing sexual assault, counseling, at the very beginning of my career, there are things now that I cringe and I'm like, I can't believe I held space, and I thought that was, that was quite healing for this person, because we don't really talk about even sexual assault in our communities. Like, it's taboo, right? And I was going head in with people that were going back into spaces that you have to be silenced around talking, about things like that. So in terms of going back to how does that look like, in terms of inviting people to be culturally responsive in their practice, there's a lot of advocacy that's happening. There's a lot of asking things to be, adapted, modified from not just in practice. So practice is one thing, right? But unless you change a whole lot of things, including having people that are from our communities being in positions of influence and power, so that there is an amplifying of our voices, right? So no one is speaking on our behalf. It goes even to our recruitment processes. We in the space that I work in, we've got psychometric testing, right, for someone to even get a job as a carer who's looking after a young person. You look at the questions that are in the psychometrics, right? They're not meant for us. They're actually not meant for us. I had someone calling me saying, look, we are seeing an increasing number of workers from a Pacifica background and an African background they were being marked really quite high on ageism. They're being ageist. I was like, oh, curious. Can you tell me what the questions are? The question is, if you had to move a couch and there was someone older than you, would you ask them to move a couch with you? And a lot of us proudly said, no, I wouldn't. I'll do it myself. Like, you're ageist, you're saying someone can't move a couch. I'm like, what are you talking about? I would never just go to a person who's older than me and just say, do this, and tell them what to do. Like, culturally, that's not appropriate, but it's not really considered. So from the recruitment processes at the front there's a lot of already gatekeeping, because the way the recruitment is set up, it's not really allowing a lot of us to get into and influence the mainstream, services that a lot of our people are getting support from, right? Yeah. So it is around training, but it is around changing culture as well. And it is around having our knowledge, our voices not being spoken, not being co-signed by anyone but us, right? A lot of advocacy. a lot of conversations, and a lot of asking and inviting organization, the organization that I work with, that we can't actually do culturally responsive practice really well unless we also acknowledge the racism and the implicit bias that's there, that's also influencing the care that people are getting. What does that look like in practice? It means that organizations need to have an anti-racism, policy, a standalone that actually states what that looks like, explicitly states what that looks like. And then you will see the ripple effect is that it then feeds into how people show up at work, and so that we also feel safe to be in those workspaces, right? Yeah.
That was a great answer. I liked that. I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to do our little brain break, if we could get the brain break music ready. Fraser, this one's for you. So you are a mentor with Afri-Auscare. If you could, and a coach, if you could explain a little bit more around what your role is in that space, and why you think it's in the time that we're in with some of the issues that our community is facing, why you think, having mentors is important for young men, and why they're a protective factor. Sorry.
That'd be good. In terms of my role with Afri-Auscare, what I do, so I work as a coach. Ryan Rooney at the back, he's the head coach of Afri-Auscare, and he does a lot of the administration, a lot of the coaching as well, but I do support him there in that, and that's my capacity as a coach. As a mentor, I work with, they have a program that they go into, Parkville Youth Justice, the facility, and we do programs on the Sundays, and we engage with the young African people that are currently, or they would be in custody at the time. We do basketball programs, we work with them, we talk with them one-on-one or as a group. And then on top of that, as they get released into community, we continue to engage with ones that choose to in the community as well. So brief explanation of my role there. In terms of, sorry, the importance of mentors. I believe that mentorship is a important thing, and I'll explain why. But we look at a young person today in this digital age. There's a lot of influence that this kid is on this young person. They face pressure at school. They face pressures within the community. They face pressure online. What does it mean to be we're looking at the context of young men or young women. What does it mean to be that? What does it mean to be black? What does it mean to be all these different things? And those questions obviously lead to trying to figure out what does it mean to be successful, and what does it mean to grow up and be an adult. Well, so in that path, there's obviously those questions, and those questions need answers. And if they keep going to those places that currently, if we're looking at a lot of the issues that we're seeing, those questions are being answered, and those answers are showing up in a bad way. But if these young people get those questions answered by people that probably have similar experiences to them, have a similar, I guess, they look like them, they have what they want to be, then this is something. It's like a playbook, a way to get to that, a map, and so that would be my explanation as to why mentors are important. And on top of that, someone that they can connect to, that is a younger person. Or not just a younger person, but it's someone that they feel like is a support that's outside of their parents as well. This is a person that I can relate to. I can probably speak to in a different way that I can't speak to the elders in my family. I'll leave my answer there.
That was great. Thank you. So we are going to take a 5-minute break. Yes, 5 minutes. In that break time, you can get water, use the bathroom. But I have a question that I would love for you guys to discuss with each other, share, which is, what is your favorite cultural practice from your country? I will go first and answer, just to give you guys an example of what I want you to do. In Zimbabwe, there is, I had chosen one and then another one came into my mind. Okay, I'm going to pick I use this one all the time. If you've ever done a workshop with me, I use this one because I think it's beautiful. It definitely acts as a protective factor against what's called postnatal depression. And it is the idea that when a woman is getting close to giving birth, she gets sent back to her family home where her mother and her aunties kind of come around her, help her prepare for birth, and help her after she's given birth with the night feeds and all of that kind of stuff. And then once she's kind of like settled into motherhood, then she kind of gets returned back to her husband's house. And I just think that's such a beautiful cultural practice because it is a prime example of how we do community and how we do family units well. And yeah, it's also one of those things that they don't discuss enough when they are writing about our stories and our experiences when it comes to mental health, is that we do have all of these practices ingrained in our cultures that are protective. Like we are not just we don't just become resilient. Like we have all of these beautiful things that are in our culture that get us there. So yeah, at the 5-minute break, if you would like to find someone and share what your favorite cultural practice is. Fantastic. Everybody is sat. We are about to start again. I'm going to ask them both 1 or 2 more questions. In the meantime, if you guys scan the QR code, it will take you to a whiteboard thingy and you can send in your anonymous questions. If we don't get through all the questions, apologies. We are on a time crunch and there is a food van outside that I'm sure we all would like to enjoy. So you understand the vibes. If you could change one thing in the education system to better support African students and families, what would it be?
Yeah, it's a big question. No, but it's multifaceted. There's a lot of different ways there's a lot of ways you could answer that question. There's a lot of different solutions that you could implement. And I think it touches on a lot of what we were talking about earlier, which is the fact that we still need advocates is obviously a larger societal problem. It's not just about schools or it's services. It's when you go to calls and you're getting followed or being black, you go into a designer store. Sorry, I know I rushed that.
You're trying to make it sound so nice. It's like, for being black.
Or you'll go to like a designer store or whatever, and you feel that presence. Someone's watching you. All those kind of things. It's the implicit bias. So I think the fact if we can, as a community or within the school, create multiple the community liaison officer type roles, or having a committee that's external to it all, that ensures that when a student is going through a situation that their parents are being supported, and then the student is also being supported, and that they're being advocated for, that young person is also having their rights being achieved. I think that would be my answer to that. Yeah.
That was a great answer. Are you ready for question 2? Equally as complex. What advice would you give to a parent or guardian who feels overwhelmed but wants to keep their child on track? Where do they start? Because we've spoken about a lot through the course of this. We've spoken about parents, the relationship that they need to build with schools, supporting their kid, working collaboratively, all of these different things. But we've also acknowledged that in the context of their lived experience, most likely having multiple children, potentially single parent household, lower socioeconomic status, more working hours, all of these different things. Where do they start?
Yeah, that is a very big question, and I think, definitely has a lot of impact, this answer. But I want to preface it by saying that I am very sympathetic to the parents' plight, especially with the issues that we're seeing in community today, and the struggle that it is to raise a kid in a community that's not like anything that you were raised in. Definitely want to preface that. And also, I'm not an expert in parenting, and I'm not a parent myself yet. But I would say that focusing on building a relationship and being involved with your child. Obviously, you have a relationship with your kid, but being involved in what they're doing, but also supporting them in being independent as well. So as they get older, give that freedom and that leash to grow and being independent, then they make the mistakes. I think that's definitely something that we need to see within a healthy household. In regard to also having healthy routines, so going to bed on time, eating healthier foods. I think these are things that are probably like things we don't really think of presently, but they actually impact. If a kid's having sugary foods in the morning, they're going to crash towards the end of the day. If a kid's not getting sleep, they're not going to be engaged at school. Screen time, these kind of things like they can have a big impact on the child's performance and their outcomes. What else can I say? I would also like building a positive. It might be a little bit controversial depending on your position on it, but having a healthy relationship with their faith, their child, like that child having looking at faith as an option and looking at faith as desirable is very much in the hands of the parent. And I think a lot of times parents don't give their child that option to look at it favorably, and it can cause that disruption there, and that actually has a big impact on a lot of outcomes as well. I think that's all that right now.
I actually had something to add on to that. I liked the last point that you brought up, because the reality is majority of us come from religious backgrounds, and I think I kind of see the interconnectedness of that and the identity of being a bad kid, where it's like sometimes faith is used as like a punishment for a kid and not as like this is something that you can explore, this is something that can be good for you. It can be like kind of used to shame the kid for their behavior or not acting right, which then makes it less favorable and kind of impacts, I guess, that aspect of their identity and being able to connect with that, which can be quite complex in the grand scheme of things, considering we all come, well, not all, but majority of us come from religious backgrounds, and that is ties into a lot of the practices, whether they're family practices, cultural practices that we hold and have. That was an interesting one. I'm going to be thinking about that one for a while. Samantha Lisa? Okay. What role do you think storytelling, especially the stories told about African families in institutions, so that's all the institutions we've discussed today, child protection, education, justice, plays in shaping the kind of care they receive?
It plays a massive role. It really does. Storytelling as a concept is beautiful if it's done right? Unfortunately, what I've seen though is that the storytelling then has an impact on, perspectives and opinions, and then that influences the care that we are either is withheld or is given, right? So I think of it, I'm gonna put a positive twist on it, not what I'm exactly always seeing, but I think of what is happening in our space in the African community, and I think of how much we are starting to get empowered to tell our stories in the way that resonates with us, and that's true and authentic to us, right? And I think, storytelling is healing, it's empowering, and it contributes to then also even evoking a bit of empathy to those people that have influence and power in resourcing us and in advocating for us, right? But I think what we get to see at the moment is what are some of the drivers for implicit bias. It's the stories that people have heard, it's the stereotypes, right, around African families or African people. And I think even, Fraser was saying it's about walking into a shop and straight away you've got security following you, or you don't get the same, there's all these discriminatory practices, you don't get the same treatment. You know, you walk into a store, it happens all the time, and then someone else who doesn't look like you walks behind you, and the storekeeper straight away says, "Hello, have you had a good day, ma'am?" And I'm like, was I invisible? I thought I was the first person to come in here. Those are discriminatory practices that are laced in the stories that they probably hear about us, right? They're following someone in a shop and thinking that you might steal. Where does that come from? It comes from stories that continuously get replayed, and media has a massive part to play in that, and a lot of responsibility and accountability in terms of that's what gets played out, right? What are the stories that we see on TV, right? It's about something has happened in our community, and therefore it gets replayed, and that then informs part of how people then see us. And the only other time that we ever make it to the media in a positive light is someone running or in sport or something, but not someone making an impact. And there are a lot of people that are making an impact. So I think a more kind of considerate and a more kind of nuanced and a more honoring of our stories is that we get to tell our stories about our strength and about our resilience and about everything that we've conquered and achieved to even be here and be able to navigate the systems that we have to navigate. So yeah, storytelling, massive part, plays a massive part.
I love. I was showing Fraser one of the questions that got sent in that I'm excited to hear what he has to say just before. So in the meantime, I'm going to ask something that I think could potentially be a little more lighthearted. Swangali, so if you could answer the question first to give Fraser some thinking time. Who are the younger generation inspiring to be, and who are their role models? Like what narratives and stories do we see them buying into that are having a negative impact?
Say that again. I feel like there's a lot in there. We might need to break it down.
I did add a little extra flair.
Okay.
The initial question was, who are the younger generation inspiring to be, and who are their role models?
Ooh.
You want the second one first?
Well, let's read the second question.
Oh, you want to read it again? Okay.
Yeah. It's really, that question is really interesting because I'm trying to place myself where I now sit and trying to center myself in that question. But then I realized that I think my time is up. I don't think I necessarily count as the younger generation anymore. Yeah, without giving away my age, I don't think. But if I think about, my younger cousins or the young people that I've come into contact with or interacted with at the moment, I'm really proud of how things have changed. Because I think for my generation, people that are my generation, we were trying to survive, right, in the system, and we were trying to assimilate. So in us assimilating in being in Australia, I've been in Australia for 21 years, and I recognize that a lot of the way I occupied spaces or navigated spaces was that I was trying to align to being white as possible. I change a bit of accent so that I don't sound African, and I present in a certain way. I know how to eat with the folk, or whatever it is that I was doing unconsciously. My second name is Brenda, but my first name is Mangaliso, and for the first 18 years I was using Brenda because someone had said in passing, I think Brenda is easier to pronounce. And I was like, yeah, sure. So for 18 years I was using Brenda. No connection to that name because I've always been called Smangaliso, right? But what I'm actually seeing in this generation is a taking back of, the power. I feel like everything ancestral that was done before us in terms of our ancestors and the histories that we have in their fighting for their freedom and liberation is just now coming through this generation that we're seeing, the younger people, right? The reclaiming of their voices, the reclaiming of their melanin, the reclaiming of their hair, the reclaiming of their traditions, and wearing that with so much pride, right? This is what I'm seeing. I'm not saying everything is rosy and dandy, but I can see the strength and I can see the movement that's happening and the shift that's happening and the way they speak, the way they hold themselves. I'm really proud to be witnessing it. So yeah, I think and the knowledge that they have. I didn't even have half the knowledge that the younger generation has now, and thanks to having accessibility to certain things that we didn't have, right? But it's how they're using that knowledge, right, to amplify their voices, to stand up and be in spaces and not holding back and going, I know that space was never meant to be occupied by someone like me, but damn, I'm gonna still go there, and do it, right? Yeah.
I love that. I love how you interpret that question positively, because I automatically had interpreted it negatively. And I don't know if it's because of something that you had said when you were talking about mentoring, Fraser. So anyway, you take the question however you want. I won't add any extra flair. Who do you think the younger generation are inspiring to be and who their role models are?
Generally speaking, I'm thinking more the negative side of things. I think that there's a lot of, that's my opinion, I guess, at the end of the day. But I think that I'll give an example. There was a kid one day walking into school. It wouldn't have been more than 8:45 a.m. This kid had taken a bus to school, and he's come off the bus. He's got headphones in his ear and walking to school. I'm like, yo, what do you listen to? As I put in my ear, and then I'm hearing all this, I'm gonna kill this guy. Like, it's talking about, it's Young Boy, right? So, if you know Young Boy, he's a rapper that talks a lot about killing, drugs, all kinds of things. At 8 a.m. in the morning, I'm like, what are you putting into your head at this time? You've already started this, like, framing in your head. And I think a lot of the time with stuff like that, kids aren't also understanding, they're priming their brains, they're absorbing that information, and they're actually, the culture that it's created around the music is, there's a set of values, ethics, what you have to follow, and that's what gets you respect. It's how you get money. This is how you survive, and that lifestyle is really reinforced by that music. And I feel like personally a lot of young people, like, especially when we're talking boys, a lot of young boys are, trying to they have an idolization of that lifestyle. Maybe not a lot of them have the ability or the confidence to actually go and emulate it, but they have an idolization. They maybe even agree with it. They'll commentate on certain aspects of it, and they'll talk about it as though, that's how you're meant to do it, even though they're not living that lifestyle at all as well. So, I would say that the role models within the community, or I guess what the community, the young people in the community are looking up to, is not completely positive. To be the yin to the yang,
I like that. Okay, to the question. Whoever sent in this question, I love this question so much. Okay, let's set up the question. Has anyone seen in the news that they recently started a pilot for young people who are in custody to be given ankle monitors so that they can be back in community and still attend school? Have we? Yeah? Okay, a few of us have seen that. I don't know how to add any more extra context than that for everyone else, that now you're caught up to speed. Fraser works in a school. I also work in a school, but my school is for young boys who have had youth justice contact. So we work in different settings. He works in a mainstream school and ours is a specialist school. And the question here was, you can definitely still answer, what is your take on the newly introduced electronic monitoring system where young people will be given ankle monitors upon their release? I'm going to add more in that, do you think it will have the desired outcomes as far as we want kids to re-engage back with school and see that as a vehicle for success and leaving that lifestyle? Sorry, I'd also like to add extra context. It's not just the ankle monitors. They've also implemented a few other things around that. They've got the students will also be assigned lived experience mentors, and there's one other thing. Yeah, that's the approach. Yeah, there's one other thing. But yeah, who'd like to go first?
Yeah. So obviously you've got to look at something like this from the different hats that are probably going to be overseeing it. You've obviously got the justice lens where they're looking at it like, we need to be able to supervise this young person, and we know that they don't really engage, or maybe they don't know, but this young person might not engage with school. We need to know where they are. I don't speak for I don't speak on behalf of my employer. I speak on my own views. I say that I can see that in terms of the what the potential outcomes and the benefits of this program could lead to could be that, yes, we see improvements in outcomes, successful parole, successful bail. Is it for parole or for bail? Bail specifically?
I can't confidently speak on that.
Is it parole as well? All right. So, look, we have successful parole, we have successful bail orders. So, look, like that could be one potential outcome. But if we look at the culture that it sets around the offending as well, we've seen overseas, we also see with the adult system. So, in the adult system, they do have the ankle tags as well. So, what it does is people will show it off, like, hey, look, and they find ways to get around it too. And especially with young people, they're not going to probably take it for what it is. Like, that is something that should be of shame. That should be something that you'd want to cover up. That should be something that speaks to a poor choice that you made in the past, and now you're dealing with the repercussions potentially years or months after the fact. So that is the reality, but that's obviously with the eyes of myself. How the young people are going to potentially see it is that this is something of a ranking. This is something that I've earned this, I've had to offend a certain amount of times to get to this point. So I don't know, like, if we're looking pros and cons of both sides, we can see that they might have the outcome. But in terms of my own personal opinion, I'm going to say that it will have positive outcomes.
Can we bring that back to the context of, I guess, this whole thing, as far as like families and potential impact and how they could then, I guess, support and be wraparound supports for those young people?
Yeah, because look, this is obviously coming as justice is probably not trusting that the families are capable, or they are in a position to successfully monitor their child, so that now they feel like we need to increase our surveillance. I mean, the obvious answer to that would be that our parents have to then match, or they have to improve, or be better, like in surveilling their kids. But I don't think it's not that simple. It's never that simple, because otherwise they wouldn't be in that situation. There's a lot of things that have happened to get that young person to where they are, and the situation in the family to get to that point as well. I do think that in the context of the family unit, I think with the enhanced bail supervision, we then look at, I think that's what it's called, EBSS. With that program, we then also have supports for the family that increase capacity, that increase or decrease, I guess, what the areas of concern are. If there's things that are actually holding parents back from being able to supervise their kids, and also, like, be present for their kids, then have those supports there. But I think that would be my way around it.
I feel like Fraser has answered it really well, and also knowing that's your area of expertise. And I think listening to the conversation with the little knowledge that I have of that program, I had more questions than answers, right? I had questions around, and maybe some people would have the same questions. I had questions around the people, who were the people that came to that decision, what evidence-based stuff where have they taken it from, right? But I also had concerns around exactly what you're saying. Does then it glamorize, offending, and then are we going to see an increase rather than a decrease of offending as well? But if I'm looking at it from a lens of, families and stuff, and for African families as well, in particular, I think of already the stigma of having a child who's offending, and now we're parading it, right, in different spaces. What does that do for that family? Does it then further disconnect them from community because of the shame that comes with that? That's the only thing that I can add. I don't feel like I am knowledgeable enough to answer, specifically about that,
I like that. I have nothing to add from what you both said. That was great. Great answers, guys. Someone asked, given that you're both in fields where you're constantly advocating and in a way have a different perspective than your peers, who do you rely on for support when you feel like you're not being heard?
Oh, I really love that. I really love that question. One of the people that I actually heavily rely on, who's helped me, particularly in this role that I'm in, is actually in this room, right? She's just sitting over there. Her name is Khayanga, and she's been my sounding board. And I think I haven't had to translate anything. I think for me, the people that I rely on are people that are either working in the field that I'm in, but also hold these really core values around seeing, justice, liberation, decolonial, very, very kind of political, very anti-Black racism, right? Very anti that. And these are the people that I feel like when I am having a moment of having experienced microaggression, at work, and I turn and look at my well-meaning white colleague, and they say, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, everything in me, my nervous system is very, very sure that was microaggression. And then if I pick up the call and I speak to Khayanga, she's like, "That's microaggression." I'm like, that's what I was saying, right? I don't have to translate that. So those are the people that I really lean on. But I also lean on a lot around that I know for a fact that I'm occupying the spaces that I'm occupying because there are people that have fought battles that I never was witness to, right? So I rely a lot on reading and stalking people that are already older than me doing this work, right? On LinkedIn or wherever, because I feel like I draw from them. I think of all the voices and the lessons and the people that have supported me getting to the space that I'm in now. So honestly, community and the people around me as well, because I don't know about you, Fraser, but I think when you work in mainstream services, this work can be very isolating, by the way, because I have to speak about things that really matter to us, and you're speaking to people that don't necessarily have the same experiences as you, and they don't necessarily. It doesn't hit at the heart because it's not their people, right? I think that's my response to that.
Yeah. So I work across multiple schools, so it's not just at one school. So with each place that I go to, there's different relationships with different people at each school. But in saying that, who I lean to or who I speak to, I will go with, so we have the Black Writers Mentorship Program that comes into the schools. And with that, most of the days I'm at work, there's usually at least one or two mentors there. So sometimes it's just a way to vent. It's just you talk. I can't speak, but you just speak. You speak, and you just talk about what happened today, what happened, like who I spoke to, and what microaggressions that I got, or what the kids told me, and when I went and approached it, I said, "Oh yeah, that was that happened," and all these kind of things that might happen on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, there's always someone there. And yeah, as you said, it's hard to speak to someone that's not got your experience, because I can't then try to explain to someone that doesn't understand some of the things that you might go on a day-to-day basis, where you're like, that was microaggression, but then you're getting that, no, it wasn't, or are you sure? You don't want to have that kind of conversation, because then it just, again, I'm not gonna swear again, but it gets you heightened again, you know. Yeah. So that right.
Gets you heightened, and then the issue becomes your response to you, right? Your heightenedness rather than the harm that was caused to you initially.
Yeah, I like that. That's going to be the last question. Feel free to harass any one of us afterwards, for those of you whose questions weren't answered or you have more that you'd like to say. I'm going to remix the question a little bit so you can both answer. Fraser, for you specifically, in a situation where parents are more trusting of what the school is saying and kids are not feeling heard, how can we best educate parents that children need to feel heard and schools are not always correct? And then for you, Smangaliso, it would be, how can we best educate parents in our community around how to navigate this new system and culture that we're in?
And again, with the luxury that my job provides the community is that there is someone that can give the behind the scenes gossip, like, oh yeah, this is going on. Like, yeah, what your kids are saying is true. Don't think it's not. Again, not every school has that ability to see behind the veil. So that's a bit more tough in that situation. But if we were looking at it from an external position and you were to give advice to, let's say, an auntie or a cousin or whatever, I would suggest that you say to that person, this is your child, yeah? Let the school provide evidence. It's there, again, this is in a court, it's the burden of evidence is on the accuser. They have to be able to prove to you that this person did wrong. And then they have to show within the policy where that wrong is. Mm-hmm. So treat it like it's a legal system and treat it as though that they actually have to come with the evidence and with everything to be able to say, yeah, your child has done wrong. Then, yeah, hold your child accountable to that. But also have your child be heard and be an advocate for them so that they also feel like, all right, if I actually have an issue, my mom or my dad, whoever, they'll come and they'll help me out. That would be my advice, yeah.
Really good answer. Hard to follow. So your question to me, can you say it again?
How, I guess it's not necessarily, not from like a I know better and like educating parents perspective, but like how can we collectively as a community educate each other and have conversations that better help families and parents navigate the different systems in this society?
Do you know, I'm going to go with what's on my heart. I feel like the first step is humility. And then the next step is dismantling the power differences and the power imbalances. A lot of services or a lot of professionals are coming into contact with families with a whole lot of power that they're not doing anything to reduce, right? And then it becomes, I'm just going to support and educate you in terms of navigating the system and being a parent in Australia, as if those parents don't have a well of wisdom and knowledge themselves. That just doesn't look like the Australian way of doing it. So unless we dismantle that power, we go in there with a whole lot of power and we get resistance from parents, and we don't know why we're getting resistance from parents. Our parents come from communities where they were leaders, they were educators, they were people that people would go to for advice. And through their displacement and their migration journey, it gets taken away. That's a lot of grief, right? You're going into a system that's already reducing you and saying, by the way, the qualifications that you had in your country don't really match this, and you're asking a parent who had a really high-paying job and well-respected to come and do a job that doesn't even touch the surface of their, of their skill set, right? And then you have someone else telling you how to parent your child, and telling you this is the way I need to educate you. I need to, because this is a language I hear as well in the system of going. And when I ask all the time, what are our goals with families? just to strengthen their parenting and teach them their parenting. And I was like, okay, we're already starting our conversation from a deficit-based that they don't have strength. Why don't you just have a conversation and deeply listen to what they think and amplify their voice, right? Before you start telling them what to do. And the minute you come to someone with a whole lot of humility and saying, I want to have a conversation with you because I believe that ultimately we have the same goals, right? You get an absolutely different parent who's going to be like, oh, so you value my voice. You value how I'm raising my child. You're just supporting me and gently holding me and walking alongside me that I can at least understand the new system that I'm in. And I think that's how we need to do it. And I don't think we do that always really well. It's always, the egos at plays and the power of being a professional. I'm this professional, and how we show up into spaces, where we set up meetings with parents, where we sit, how we talk to them in our language, in our tone as well, where we're not looking like we're telling off parents, but we're going, I just want to have a conversation with you. Yeah.
There's a really powerful last answer. If we could please give them a round of applause. That brings this forum to an end. Thank you all so much for coming out, participating, sending in your questions. I think we had a really robust conversations. I know I'm leaving here feeling inspired and with lots to think about. And I hope it's the same for you all.